You are sitting at a dinner table with four other people, and the conversation is moving at a comfortable, rhythmic pace. Someone makes a joke about a recent news story or a mutual friend, and everyone laughs. You laugh too, but yours is a half-second late because you were busy calculating the 3 different ways that joke was technically inaccurate. You catch yourself about to explain the discrepancy because the need for precision is pressing against the back of your teeth like a physical weight. But you see the relaxed look on your friends' faces, and you swallow the words. You realize in that moment that you are playing a character. You are pretending to be as simple as the conversation requires you to be, and the silence that follows feels heavier than it should. The hidden truth is that your intelligence is not a tool you use, but a filter you cannot turn off, and it is slowly making you a stranger to the people you love most. You are not just being difficult or pedantic. You are experiencing a specific kind of biological isolation, where your brain is processing data at a bandwidth the people around you do not even know exists. This is the part that no one tells you about having a high IQ. It is not about the scores or the prestige or the ability to solve puzzles. It is about the 7 weird habits that look like personality flaws to the outside world, but are actually sophisticated survival mechanisms for a brain that never learned how to go to sleep. You are the kind of person who has probably never said this out loud, but you often feel like you are narrating your own life from a distance rather than living it. You have likely spent years wondering why you cannot just be easy, why you cannot just let things go, and why you feel a strange sense of relief when a social plan gets canceled at the last minute. This hits hardest if you have spent your adult life trying to hide how much you are actually noticing. One of the most immediate habits you likely possess is a chronic need to self-correct mid-sentence. You will be halfway through a story and suddenly stop to change a single word because the word you just used was 90% accurate, but not 100%. To the person listening, it feels like you are stuttering or being overly formal, but to you, it feels like a moral obligation. This is the mechanism of hyper-precision. It comes from an internal logic that says if I am not perfectly understood, I am not safe. When you were younger, you probably realized that people often misunderstood your intentions or your logic, so you began to build a cage of perfect language around yourself. The cost of this is that you are rarely present in the moment because you are too busy acting as your own editor. You are watching the words come out of your mouth and judging them in real time, which creates a constant static of self-consciousness that makes true intimacy feel exhausting. Then there is the silence. You have likely been told that you are a good listener, or perhaps that you are intimidatingly quiet, but the truth is simpler and more taxing. When someone asks you a question, you do not answer immediately. There is a perceptible gap, a 3-second window where your face goes slightly blank. During those 3 seconds, your brain is not just looking for an answer, it is scanning for the implications of the question, checking for logical inconsistencies, and preparing for 3 different potential follow-up points. This is deep processing depth. It makes you appear thoughtful to some and distant to others. But inside your body, that pause feels like a frantic search through a library where the lights have been dimmed. You are terrified of giving a shallow answer, because to you, a shallow answer is a lie. Some people watching this have never told anyone about the moment they realized they do not actually know how to ask for comfort without feeling weak. What happens next is usually the habit of time blindness. You are the person who is chronically 10 minutes late, or you are the person who arrives 40 minutes early because you do not trust your own perception of the clock. This is not because you are lazy or disrespectful. It is because when your brain locks onto a task, it enters a state of hyperfocus that effectively shuts down the parts of your nervous system that track the passage of time. You are not in the room anymore. You are in the problem. This was likely an adaptation from a childhood where intellectual achievement was the only way to get consistent, positive attention. You learned to disappear into your mind because the physical world was either boring or unpredictable. Now, as an adult, this habit costs you. It costs you the trust of your partner, who thinks you do not value their time. It costs you the respect of colleagues who think you are disorganized. They see a lack of discipline, but what you feel is a total loss of self in the pursuit of a singular thought. You might notice that your physical environment is a disaster, even though your digital files are perfectly organized. You can find a specific line of code or a quote from a book you read 3 years ago in seconds, but you have no idea where your car keys are. This mess is not a sign of a cluttered mind. It is a sign of a mind that has prioritized internal architecture over external aesthetics. You simply do not have the cognitive energy left to care about the laundry when you are busy reevaluating the structural integrity of your entire worldview. The emotional logic here is that the physical world feels temporary and shallow compared to the permanence of an idea. But the cost is a constant, low-grade shame. You avoid having people over not because you are antisocial, but because you do not want them to see the evidence of your inability to handle the basic requirements of being a person. But what if the reason it feels so natural to handle everything alone is not because you were stronger than the other kids? What if it is because nobody noticed when you stopped needing help? This is where the shift happens. We talk about these habits as if they are quirky traits of the gifted, but when we look closer, we see they are actually symptoms of a profound lack of emotional safety. If you have a high IQ, you likely spent your formative years being the smartest person in the room, which sounds like a privilege until you realize it means you were also the person with the least amount of support. You became the problem solver for everyone else. You became the one who didn't need things explained. And because you were so good at figuring things out, the adults in your life stopped checking in. You were left alone with a high-powered engine of a brain and no manual on how to regulate the heat it produces. Your weird habits are not just intellectual leftovers. They are the scars of having to raise yourself intellectually before you were emotionally ready to handle the weight of what you knew. This leads to the fifth habit, which is the constant internal monologue that often spills out into talking to yourself when you are alone. You aren't just thinking, you are debating. You are externalizing your logic because your internal world has become so complex that it requires a secondary witness, even if that witness is just the sound of your own voice. This is a compensation for a lifetime of feeling unheard. If no one in your immediate circle can follow the complexity of your thoughts, you create a version of yourself that can. It is a way of validating your own existence in a world that feels increasingly simplified and thin. You feel the tension in your chest when you have a breakthrough and have no one to tell who will actually understand why it matters. So you tell the air. You tell the steering wheel. You tell the empty kitchen. The sixth habit is the most socially damaging, and that is the absolute allergy to small talk. It isn't that you think you are better than people who talk about the weather or celebrities. It is that your brain literally does not know how to engage with information that has no systemic value. Small talk feels like trying to eat soup with a fork. It is inefficient, it is messy, and it leaves you hungry. For you, communication is about the exchange of depth, and anything less feels like a performance that drains your battery. This often leads to a pattern of isolation. You start saying no to parties. You start avoiding the break room at work. You end up being labeled as cold or arrogant, when the truth is, you are just trying to protect your nervous system from the friction of shallow interactions. The cost is a specific kind of loneliness that is hard to explain to people. You are surrounded by people, but you are starving for a real conversation. Finally, there is the night owl phenomenon. You likely find that your best work happens after midnight, or that you struggle with insomnia not because you are worried, but because your brain refuses to stop generating ideas. This is intellectual arousal. When the rest of the world goes quiet, the pressure to perform drops. The expectations of the social world disappear, and you finally have the space to think without the interruption of other people's needs. But this habit creates a physiological rift. You are constantly out of sync with the daylight world. You are tired during the meetings that matter, and wired when you should be resting. You are living in a time zone that doesn't exist on any map. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the person who notices everything but is allowed to say nothing. When you look at these habits together, you see a portrait of someone who has used their intelligence as a shield for a very long time. You use precision to avoid being misunderstood. You use silence to avoid being wrong. You use focus to avoid being overwhelmed. You use isolation to avoid being drained. But shields are heavy, and eventually the thing you use to protect yourself becomes the thing that prevents you from being reached. You are standing in your life with all this processing power and all this insight, and yet you find yourself wondering why the simplest parts of being human, like asking for a hug or admitting you are scared, feel like the hardest problems you have ever had to solve. The cost of this clarity is the loss of the easy connection that everyone else seems to have by default. You watch people walk through their lives with a level of unthinking comfort that you have never known. They don't have to rehearse their coffee orders. They don't have to analyze the subtext of a text message for 20 minutes before responding. They are just there, and you are here, behind the glass of your own mind, watching the world happen in high definition, but unable to feel the warmth of the sun. When you think about the way you handle everything now, the precision, the distance, the constant internal calculation, the way you hide your mess and your midnight thoughts, how much of that is who you actually are, and how much of it is just the person you had to become so that no one would notice how lonely you were in a room full of people who thought you had all the answers?